Hi, welcome back to Girls with Power Tools. This is Barbara Rainey. Today we're going to tackle a really fun issue that has been coming up a lot lately with people who I work with, and that is how to deal with open items, open tickets. Got something, and I know it started on a particular date and it ended on another date, and I want to be able to count it during all of the dates that are between those dates, but it's a little trickier than you think it is. So today we're going to tackle open tickets. All right, so this is the nirvana. This is exactly what we want to see. So this Gantt chart shows each of our tickets going through each of their stages, and then the next ticket starts and goes through its stage. And not just when it starts a stage, but it's also still being counted when there's no activity on that particular ticket. All right, that's actually the tricky part. Now, if you've got data and you say, you know what, I've got a create date, I'm going to go ahead and create a relationship between my ticket on its create date and my date table, what you'll end up getting in your table that you see is just only having your ticket counted on the date that it is moving from stage to stage to stage. But in the interim date, you'll notice 217 doesn't even show up. So, and that's because none of our tickets had any activity on that day. But we really want to be able to count them on all of the days that they have activity. So how are we going to do that? We're going to open up our query editor and look at the data that we're bringing in. So I just used the enter data functionality, which is this guy right here, to dump in some hard-coded data from my source. Now, in reality, you would want to have that be nice and dynamic, so you'd want to connect directly to your data source. But for purposes of illustration, we're just using the enter data function in order to bring it into the data model. We've got a created date, and this is the date that it moves, each ticket moves from stage to stage to stage. We've got the ticket number, the stage it's moving through, the owner of the ticket, the current status of the ticket, and you'll notice ticket 1001 is still open. It never closed. 1002 does have a close date, and 1003 also has a close date. We also have a date table in our data model because we are going to need it. I created it by using a nice M query that I have that uses a start date and an end date, and it has a series of M steps that will create a nice generated date table for you. And then we're going to go ahead and close and apply. And that is going to load our data into our data model. I'm going to switch now over to a different data model that does not have all of our calculations in it, so that we can see how we're going to go about creating this magical dates between scenario. So what we need to do is figure out when each of these stages that are no longer open have actually completed. I'm going to use a two-stage process to do it. You can actually combine this all into one, but I find for some of my users who are new to DAX, having a two-stage in here makes it a little bit easier to do the analysis. So what we're going to do is we're going to create first a calculated column on our data model, and I'm going to switch in to this ticket history table so we can create a new column. And this new column is going to be called LowIsNew. So I'm going to actually number, say for ticket 1001, we're going to number all of these rows from 1 to the newest, all the way back to however many stages it's got, so that you can kind of see how it's progressing through its status. All right, so the calculation I'm adding here is calculate count rows. So we're counting the rows in our table called ticket history, which is the one we're in. We're going to filter all of the ticket history. So the all is going to remove all of the filters from anything on this table. So it's going to look at the entire table. And then the row that is inside the earlier is the row that you're currently investigating. So it's going to say, what ticket am I? I'm 1001. find all of the records that have a 1001. So that's the equals here. Okay, so we're going to find those. Then I'm going to also look at my created date, and I'm going to look at all of the rows that have a created date greater than my date, and I'm going to count those rows. So my date is 2/15, so I'm going to count the rows that have a greater date. So there are 7 rows that have a greater date than me. Now, these blanks can be a little problematic to work with in these formulas. So we're going to actually add 1 to this calculation so that every row has a valid number in it. It's just going to make it a little easier later. The next thing we're going to do is now we're going to actually put in our expiration date. So when we do the expiration date, we're going to use a different syntax, new column. So now we're going to go ahead and bring in our second calculation. So we're going to do row expiration. So we're going to use the var syntax, which is creating a variable. That allows us to create one complex calculation and then use it in a secondary component all within the same measure. Makes everything just a little bit more efficient. So what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the minimum create date, where, once again, we're using that same filter all tickets. Ticket history is equal to the earlier. So this is the line I'm in. So 2015 is my line. And I'm comparing it to all of the other lines that have the same ticket history or the same ticket number, which is this guy. And then I'm going to compare my LowIsNew number. And I'm going to say, look at my LowIsNew number, which is 8, minus 1, which is 7, and find me the row with my same ticket number that has 7 as the LowIsNew, and bring me back his create date. So that could be the entire calculation. But we also want to take into effect the fact that it might already be closed, which means instead of using the previous date, we actually want to use the closed date of the ticket. So in order to use our var variables, we're going to do a return. So return if our status is open. Then we're going to check to make sure we have a proper expire date that we calculated up above. If it hasn't expired because there isn't a record with that correct number in it, we're going to say its expiry is today. And that will allow us, when we have a ticket that's still open, to have an end date that keeps creeping towards today. So if we have a ticket that's open, it's going to use today as its expiry for this record. Otherwise, we're going to use whatever the calculated expire date is, which in our case is 2/18, and we're going to minus 1. And the reason we're going to do that is so that this status completed the day before it started its next status. That way our Gantt chart has nice even delineation between each of the different steps. If the status is not open, that means it's closed, we're going to use its ticket history close date. So let's go ahead and see this guy in action. As you know, when we do a calculated column that's a date, it brings it in with this default. So we're going to go ahead and set it to be a default that's a little easier to read. How did we work? So for ticket 1001, this row stage A has a created date of 2/15. The next date has a created date of 2/18, which means this one has a row expire of 2/17. That worked perfectly. Now in ticket 2002, there's a closure down here. So we want to pick up 2/24 as our expiry date so that that one is properly ending on time. And that worked properly. And once again, this one closed on 3/2 and it's closing properly. So that all works. So now I have a beginning and an end date in my records. Now, for those of you who have tuned in to get a active ticket and you already had a create and an expiry in each of your rows, guess what? You get a skip to this part. The next thing we're going to do is create the measure. When you create a measure, you're not going to see it show up here, right? It's just going to show up in your list, and it's going to have a little different icon. See this f of x here? That is a calculated column. Now we're going to do a new measure, and our new measure is going to be the active tickets measure. The active tickets measure is going to look something like this. Oops. I forgot to get rid of measure equals at the beginning, so it's giving me a little bit of an issue at the moment. So let's delete that, and let's look at our calculation here. Before we actually walk through the whole calculation, let's create a table and we'll see if it worked. In here we've got our tickets and our stage. We've got our active tickets. Active tickets requires the date table in order to work properly. So let's go ahead and bring in date. But it's bringing in this hierarchy. We want to see the real date, so let's bring those in, and ta-da. Let's look at that active ticket. Let's see if we can understand what's going on. So we're doing a distinct count of our tickets, and that way we're not ever counting the same ticket twice. We're filtering our ticket history. Our focus date is 2/23. We want to make sure that when we're filtering ticket history to count the rows, that our created date from the row that we're counting is less than or equal to the date that is in focus of the visualization, which in the case of what I'm highlighting is 2/23. So the created date for this row is before 2/23. And then also we're using the ampersand, and that allows us to have multiple filters in one filter function, in addition to the created date being before the date. The expiry has to be after the date, okay? And the mins and the maxes are in here to help us when we have like a month end to be able to capture all of the tickets that have activity in that particular month. And then to help the calculate know over which values we want to do this distinct count, we bring the values function in as a final filter within the calculate. Now you can do all kinds of great, you can slice and dice. I can slice and dice on particular people, on particular products, whatever it is. So there you have it, kids. You can create a cool Gantt chart or just a calculation of your beautiful visualizations by using your active tickets measure with a few other helper columns to get the job done. Now, a few of you are going to say, hey, there's a more complex way of doing it. Absolutely. The one good thing to know about Power BI, DAX, and M is there's always 17 different ways of doing it. But this is a way I'm finding that for some of my users who are just getting started with DAX, that they can follow along, fill in their values, and get to a good visual that tells the story. Now, for those of you who are wondering how we went ahead and created the actual Gantt chart out of a matrix, all we did is use conditional formatting. So I applied actually two different formats, one to background color scale of the active tickets, and I just said specify my blank values to be white, and specify anything over a 1 to be my particular shade of blue. And then that way, if they ever came in and had a number that was more, it would show. And then in order to make the numbers not show up, I went ahead and did the exact same to the font as well. So now I have a blue on blue, and so it just looks like a nice filled in bar. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for joining me on Girls with Power Tools. This is Barbara Rainey signing off.